Welcome to Unspoken Affairs. If this is your first time here, hello. If you're returning, thank you for coming back. Today's story is raw, complicated, and honest. It's about grief, about how loneliness can bend the rules you thought were unbreakable, and about what happens when comfort becomes something more. I'm going to tell you everything, the moments that felt small at the time, the ones that shifted everything, and the questions I still don't know how to answer. So if you're ready, subscribe, hit the bell, and settle in. This one goes deep. I promise you, I never planned for this to happen. I didn't wake up one morning and decide I would let somebody close me the way I needed to be closed. There was no list, no plan, only a slow, quiet erosion of boundaries I thought were solid. My name is Patricia, 24, and 8 months ago, my life lost the person who was its compass. My mother died cancer in the quietest way possible. A Tuesday morning in a hospital that smelled like antiseptic and lost time. The image of her last breath, the way Dad held her, the way the world went still is burned into me. It's a photograph I can't unsee. After the funeral, people came and went. Plates of food appeared on our porch, casseroles cold and stacked. They said what people say, stay strong, she's in a better place. Time heals. They patted our backs and left. The house felt smaller with each departure. The silence settled like dust. Mark had known my mother for years. He was friendly with her and my dad, came for holidays, carried himself with a practical gentleness that made him the kind of person who filled quiet rooms without asking for permission. He wasn't family. He was one of those steady, reliable adults, an uncle figure by comfort, not by blood. After the funeral, Mark was the person out of town who showed up and didn't leave the way others did. He brought soup and tools and he sat. For the first few weeks, it was practical things. He fixed the leaky faucet my dad forgot about. He showed up with extra blankets, invited us to eat when we couldn't make a meal. Most of all, he listened. He didn't try to fix everything. He brought coffee without comment and sat in the living room while we sorted through boxes of memories. In a way, he became part of the scaffolding that kept us upright. Grief is strange. It rearranges priorities and makes you see faces you've always known in new light. When someone comes to your house and sits with you through the quiet hours, their presence grows weight. I remember laughing at a burned chicken story Mark told about my mother, the one where she nearly set the kitchen on fire on their first date. He told it with a smile that broke when he said her name. I laughed through a sob and he reached for the remote and didn't look away. His hand resting on the arm of the couch felt absurdly like the last safe thing in the house. At first, nothing happened. We shared long silences, cleanup sessions, late-night cups of bad coffee. But the nights felt different longer, more dangerous in small ways. My dad slept like someone exhausted from carrying the world. I stayed up. The house's creaks and the rain were my company. One night, I wandered down the hall and found Mark sitting cross-legged on the couch. A sweater I recognized as my mother's folded across his lap. He'd been in the kitchen earlier, just like any helper. That kind of practical presence again. But this time, he looked different. Tired and exactly human. I sat down beside him without thinking. We didn't speak. He put a blanket around my shoulders when my teeth started chattering. He smelled faintly of his cologne and my mother's laundry. When he held me, the kind of hold that says, I see you, I'm here. It landed somewhere that had been cracked for months. For the first time since the funeral, I slept. The next morning, I woke with a hollow in my chest I hadn't felt before. It wasn't just comfort anymore. It was something that made me uneasy in the best and worst ways. Part of me wanted to name it and run. Part of me wanted to cling. The thing about grief is you start confusing needs with answers. You begin to believe that the presence of someone who keeps you breathing is the same thing as love. We didn't catapult into things. There was no cinematic fall. Instead, it was a series of small, trembling moments. A touch that lingered too long. A shared look that felt like permission we hadn't asked for. Once during a rainy Saturday when the house smelled like warm bread and damp earth, I came downstairs swaddled in a sweater that had belonged to my mother. There's a strange power to wearing someone's scent, like carrying a ghost. Mark looked up from the couch and his eyes softened in a way I'd never seen directed at me. He wasn't looking at me like a child or a young woman who needed guidance. He looked at me like I was someone fragile and whole at the same time. When his fingers brushed my cheek and he whispered, "You're beautiful," it landed like a thunderclap. It wasn't wild or violent. It was quiet and immediate and packed with all the things we hadn't said out loud. He asked, almost unsteady, "Do you want me to stop?" And I, in a way that I still haven't fully forgiven myself for, shook my head. We crossed a line. We kissed. It was tentative, soft, as if grief had taught our hands a new language of need. It felt like finding oxygen after holding your breath too long, and it felt terrifying. We both pulled away in the same breath, the kind of simultaneous shock that feels like falling and landing at once. I need to be clear. This is not a story about exploitation. Mark is not a predator. He is an adult with his own complicated feelings. But the power dynamics were complicated. We were both broken, both hungry for the human warmth that suddenly made sense again. To grieving people, finding comfort in each other is not, on the surface, a crime of malice, but it becomes a moral tangle when that comfort grows into something we didn't plan for. And when the lines between being cared for and being loved become blurred, the morning after was worse than I'd imagined. We moved around like strangers. It was a cartoon of normalcy: coffee, toast, a newspaper folded open, but the air was thick with things neither of us had the courage to say. When we brushed hands over the butter, our skin electrified and we looked away. There was no dramatic argument. There was only silence that screamed. Day by day, I replayed the night in my head. Every micro moment. The angle of his hand, the way the light hit his face, the timbre of his whisper. I asked myself, did he mean it? Was I a replacement for something else? Or was this something that grew out of genuine feeling, however misbegotten? It is one thing to feel compelled to someone in the rawness of grief. It is another to confuse that compulsion with love. I started noticing things I hadn't before. How he smiled when he remembered my mother's laugh. The way he knelt to fix something without complaining. The way he listened when I told him my stupid little stories about how Mom used to fold towels. He filled a hole. But filling a hole isn't the same as building a foundation. There were nights I lay awake and pictured my mother's face. I imagined telling her, "There is a peculiar cruelty in that. The idea that the person you lost would be the judge of your survival choices." Was I betraying her memory? Was I betraying myself? These questions didn't come with tidy answers. After a while, I forced a conversation because the silence had become its own sort of violence. We were folding laundry, ordinary, domestic. A ritual that made the day feel like one before the storm, and I couldn't take the waiting any longer. I looked up at him and asked the simple, wrenching question, "What are we doing?" He looked at me like someone trying to measure a sudden, unfamiliar weight. "I don't know," he said. "I think about it every day. Sometimes I think, I don't know what to think, but I don't regret feeling close to you." He sounded tired in a way. I recognized from the night he and my father had sat at the hospital. A person caught between loyalty and loneliness. Those words settled in me like smoke. We weren't a tidy story. We were messy. And messy stories don't have neat, clickable morals. What they do have, if you're lucky, is the chance to choose what kind of person you want to be on the other side. I asked him, "Do we tell your wife?" No, Mark was not married. "Do we tell Dad?" How could we? The boundaries had blurred into a fog. Then I felt complicit simply in being human. We tried to keep our lives separate from what had happened. We pretended it was an anomaly, a single misstep that would roll off like a flake of ash. But secrets live inside rooms. They find their way into coffee cups, into washing baskets, into the way you sleep. Every small act of normalcy, chopping an onion, sweeping the floor, answering a phone call, was now threaded with a hidden line. I began to pay more attention to the consequences. Not just the guilt that woke me at night, but the ripple outward. How would my father feel? He'd been stripped of his companion once. Could he bear the truth if he found out that the man who'd been kind to him after? The funeral was now entangled with his daughter. The image of my dad's flinched confusion terrified me more than the shame. We went back and forth between closeness and distance for weeks. There were afternoons where we laughed like two old friends sorting through silly. anecdotes, and there were evenings where the distance between us felt like an abyss. At times, I wanted to stop it, to take the break, put the space between us, and reroute my need for comfort into therapy or into friendships. At other times, when the loneliness was an ache that no one else soothed, I would find myself sliding back into that dangerous familiarity. The turning point came not with drama, but with a question that finally landed and refused to leave the table. What do we want from each other that grief has made acceptable? Do we want to live in the shadow of what happened, patchwork and furtive? Or do we want to find a way to repair what's been broken and move forward honestly? We decided to do something neither of us thought we could. We spoke with someone. Not because we wanted a convenient excuse, rather because the silence was making monsters of our best intentions. I found a counselor who worked with grief and boundary issues, someone who didn't judge but named what we were doing. That naming was painfully liberating. In sessions, we explored the reasons we gravitated toward each other. I had unresolved abandonment wounds. Mark had a loneliness he hadn't addressed. A man who had loved my mother as a friend and then found himself deeply entangled in the lives she had built. We both had gaps that needed more than each other to fill. We were not villains, but humans, fragile, capable of error. Craving connection. Counseling didn't make everything right overnight. It didn't erase what had happened, but it gave us tools, ways to hold accountability without destructive shame. Ways to communicate honestly without destroying what remained of our family. We worked on boundaries. We stopped letting the house become a trap of late-night closeness. We started to plan for separate activities. We spoke with my father, not everything at once. But we let honesty in measured doses so it wouldn't destroy him. Here's the hard, plain truth. Choosing to put your life back together after crossing a line is a slow, often humiliating work. It's waking up and choosing repair over secrecy. It's apologizing and doing the work to be worthy of forgiveness, even if forgiveness isn't guaranteed. It's telling someone you love that you made a terrible choice and listening to them name their hurt. For me, the decision to stop the secret and to seek help wasn't the end of feeling. Those feelings didn't evaporate. They softened and took on new shapes. Grief still whispered in the corners of the house. Mark and I still had complex feelings. But instead of using each other as a remedy for the void, we started using the tools the counselor gave us. Journaling when the urge to cross a boundary rose. Calling a friend, going for a walk. Checking in with honesty instead of assumption. You might be thinking, are there neat answers? No, I won't pretend there are. There are consequences, and consequences change you. My relationship with Mark transformed into something different. Not a clandestine romance, but a careful rescantee, a careful, grown-up friendship that acknowledged pain and set protective limits. Not every story ends like that, and that's okay. Different choices lead to different roads. My story is merely one of many possibilities. If I could give advice to someone listening who's in the middle of a similar storm, it would be this. Name the ache. Grief distorts. Call your need what it is, loneliness, fear, numbness, and tell a trusted person who is outside the immediate circle. Seek help. A counselor will not shame you. They'll help you see structures and patterns you can't see from inside your own grief fog. Protect the vulnerable. If there are people in your life who will be harmed by your choices, think of them while making decisions. Acting alone seldom leads to good outcomes. Be gentle but accountable. Mistakes happen. Growth is choosing the harder path of repair instead of the easier path of secrecy. I tell you this not as a lecture, but as someone who's walked those steps and still stumbles. I tell you this because stories like mine need to be told honestly, not sensationalized. People live complicated lives, and grief makes them more complicated still. That doesn't excuse hurt, but it explains it. If you're still with me, thank you. If you're watching for the drama, I get it. Human nature is curious, but I hope the takeaway is bigger than scandal. It's about how human beings make messy decisions when they're hurting, and how, if we're willing, we can choose to be better afterward. Before I go, a few practical things. If you or someone you know is struggling with grief, please look into local mental health resources. If there's an immediate crisis, contact emergency services in your area. I've linked some grief resources in the description below. If this story resonated, hit the like button and share your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear from you. How would you handle this? Have you ever been in a situation where comfort turned into something more? What helped you? Your honesty helps other people feel less alone. If you're new here, welcome to Unspoken Affairs. We share real, complicated stories, the kind that make you squirm and the kind that make you think. Subscribe if you want to hear more. We post daily and we read every comment. Thank you for listening to me be honest. It's not easy to lay your mistakes on a table, but it's part of learning. I'm still learning. We're still healing. And I hope on the other side of that work, there's a quieter, kinder life waiting.